The rain hadn't stopped all day. The city looked like it was drowning in its own sorrow, streets glistening with headlights, puddles swallowing reflections of a world too busy to notice the broken hearts walking through it. Among them was Emily Carter, holding a faded umbrella that barely kept the storm off her face. Her eyes were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the exhaustion of living a life that never seemed to go her way. Her shoes were worn out, her coat buttoned wrong, and her heart, guarded like an old house with too many broken windows. That night, Emily stood outside the restaurant she worked in, a small, warm place where laughter filled the air and the smell of roasted coffee lingered like a kind memory. Inside, through the glass, she could see Daniel Hayes, the kind of man who didn't belong in her world. He was confident, successful, dressed in a tailored suit, with the kind of charm that drew people in effortlessly. He wasn't just handsome, he was magnetic, like sunlight after a long winter. She had seen him there a few times, always polite, always smiling, but she never dared to think he'd notice her beyond the apron she wore. And yet, that night, he did. When she brought his order to the table, their eyes met, and for a brief moment, it felt as if the rain outside had stopped. Daniel asked her name, and when she told him, he repeated it softly, like he was trying to remember it forever. It was the kind of moment that changes nothing, but also somehow changes everything. Before the story unfolds further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the beauty of love that looks beyond appearances, please take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps more people see stories that touch hearts and remind us what truly matters. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel kept returning to that little restaurant, not because of the coffee or the food, but because of Emily. She was quiet, yet her eyes held a gentleness that made the world feel softer. She wasn't the kind of woman who stood out in a crowd, but there was something about her silence that spoke louder than any voice. He learned she worked double shifts to support her younger brother Ryan, who had a medical condition that made every day uncertain. Their parents had passed away when she was 19, and ever since, Emily had been fighting battles no one else could see. She never complained, she never asked for help, but Daniel could see the weight she carried, the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was watching, the way she smiled to hide how tired she really was. Daniel started leaving her notes on napkins, little quotes, small compliments, or sometimes just a single word, hope. At first she tried to ignore them. Then one day she smiled while reading one, and he knew he had won a piece of her heart. It wasn't long before he asked her out. She laughed, nervously, softly, like she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. "You're out of my league," she said quietly, eyes lowered, afraid to meet his. "You're everything I'm not. Look at you, Daniel. You belong to a world I'll never fit into." But Daniel only smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Then I'll come down to yours," he said. That single line broke every wall she had built. Their story began not in glamour but in simplicity. Daniel didn't take her to fancy places or flood her with expensive gifts. Instead, they walked under city lights, shared fries from food trucks, and sat by the park fountain just talking for hours. He made her laugh in ways she hadn't in years, and she made him feel grounded in a world that had always been too shallow for real connection. But love, true love, always meets its test. Daniel's friends didn't understand. To them, Emily was just a waitress, a nice girl, sure, but not someone who fit the image of a man like him. His business partners whispered that she was a distraction. Even his mother, elegant and cold, told him he was making a mistake. "She'll never be enough for you," she said one evening over dinner. Daniel stood up, his voice steady but pained. "Maybe it's not about being enough. Maybe it's about being right." Emily, however, was not as strong. When she heard what people said, it broke something inside her. She started to pull away, answering his text later, smiling less, avoiding his gaze when he came to the restaurant. Daniel noticed, of course. He always noticed. One night, he found her sitting on the back steps behind the restaurant, her head buried in her hands, tears falling silently. He sat beside her without a word. Finally, she looked at him, her voice trembling. "You don't deserve this, Daniel. You deserve someone who can stand beside you, not behind you. Someone who doesn't have to worry about bills or who doesn't smell like coffee every day. I'm just ordinary." Daniel took her hands gently. "Emily," he said, "you call yourself ordinary, but do you know how extraordinary it is to survive what you've survived? To love despite everything? You are the most beautiful kind of rare." But Emily couldn't believe him then. Her insecurities had roots too deep to pull out overnight, so she ended it. The next few months were quiet. Emily buried herself in work pretending she was fine. Daniel tried to move on, but he couldn't. He visited the restaurant a few times, hoping to see her, but she avoided him. Life had drawn a line between them, and both were too afraid to cross it again. Then one evening, fate stepped in. Ryan's condition worsened. The hospital bills piled up, and Emily was told her brother needed surgery immediately, one that she couldn't possibly afford. She sold everything she could, borrowed from friends, but it wasn't enough. Standing outside the hospital that night, she felt smaller than ever, her world collapsing around her. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Please, not him. Take anything, but not him." That's when Daniel found her. He had heard about Ryan through one of her coworkers. Without a second thought, he paid for the surgery. When Emily confronted him, her eyes filled with tears, he simply said, "You don't owe me anything. I'm just helping someone who once made me believe in love again." Ryan's surgery was successful. Emily spent days in the hospital by his side, grateful beyond words. When she finally saw Daniel again, she broke down completely. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "After everything I said, after I pushed you away," Daniel smiled faintly. "Because love doesn't vanish when it's hurt. It waits, it hopes, it forgives." Something inside Emily shifted that day. For the first time, she believed him. Not because of his words, but because of what he had done. She realized love wasn't about leagues, wealth, or appearances. It was about showing up when it mattered most. Months later, Emily had saved enough to quit the restaurant and start a small bakery, something she had always dreamed of. She called it Second Chances. On the day it opened, Daniel was her first customer. He bought a cupcake and left a note on the counter, just like he used to on napkins. It said, "Told you I'd come down to your world. Turns out, it's far more beautiful than mine." Tears blurred her eyes as she read the note. She ran outside, and there he was, standing under the same old rain that had once introduced them. But this time, it didn't feel cold. It felt like coming home. She walked up to him and whispered, "You never stopped believing in me." Daniel looked at her softly. "You just needed someone to remind you who you really were." That was the moment everything changed for good. Years later, their love became the kind people talk about, the kind that starts with broken pieces and ends with something stronger. Emily's bakery grew into a success, known not just for its cakes but for the story behind it. She often told customers that life had a strange way of giving us what we need, not what we expect. And sometimes, love really does come down to meet us where we are. If this story touched your heart or reminded you that real love isn't about status but about soul, please like, share, and subscribe. Help spread the message that kindness, humility, and second chances still matter in this world. Special request: before you leave, drop a comment below with one line. True love comes down, it never looks down. If you believe that real love always finds its way. As the rain continued to fall outside that little bakery window, Emily watched Daniel sip his coffee and smile at her from across the counter. It was in that simple, ordinary moment that she realized the truth. Love doesn't belong to leagues or levels. Love belongs to hearts that dare to meet halfway. And when he reached across the counter to hold her hand, she smiled through her tears, because this time, she finally believed she was enough.